made him an effective combat medic during his 2 tours overseas. He could see that Brandon's airway was partially obstructed by his positioning, and the irregular breathing pattern suggested possible pneumothorax. More critically, the smoke from the engine compartment was getting thicker. "I'm a trained medic," Marcus announced to the crowd, though he didn't elaborate on his military background or explain his qualifications. "This car might catch fire. We have to move him now." The assembled residents looked at each other uncertainly. Marcus didn't fit their image of a medical professional. His work clothes and obvious blue-collar status made his claim seem unlikely. Dr. Chen shook her head firmly. "I'm a doctor, and I'm telling you that moving him is too dangerous," she said. "Please wait for the paramedics." But Marcus was already testing the passenger door handle. The door was damaged but not completely jammed. With some effort, he managed to wrench it open far enough to access the interior. The smell of gasoline was stronger now, confirming his fears about the vehicle's stability. "What's he doing?" someone whispered as Marcus squeezed into the passenger compartment. Inside the vehicle, Marcus could assess Brandon's condition more accurately. The young man had suffered significant head trauma, evidenced by the bleeding in his unconscious state. His breathing was shallow and irregular, indicating possible chest injuries. Most concerning was his positioning. Brandon was slumped forward against the steering wheel in a way that could be compressing his airway. Marcus had faced similar situations during his military service. In Afghanistan, he'd extracted wounded soldiers from damaged vehicles under much more dangerous circumstances. The principles were the same: assess, stabilize, evacuate. But now he was operating alone, without proper equipment, surrounded by skeptical civilians who questioned his qualifications. "Sir, you need to get out of that car immediately," Dr. Chen demanded from outside. "You're not qualified to handle this." Marcus carefully positioned himself to support Brandon's head and neck. His hands moved with practiced precision, feeling for spinal alignment while maintaining airway clearance. Years of muscle memory guided his movements as he began the delicate process of stabilizing the patient for extraction. "I've done this before," Marcus called out to the crowd. "In Afghanistan. This boy is going to die if we don't move him." The mention of military service gave some residents pause, but skepticism remained high. Marcus's appearance and current circumstances made it difficult for them to accept his medical credentials. They saw a construction worker making claims about military experience, not a trained medical professional. Meanwhile, Brandon's breathing became more labored. Marcus could feel the young man's pulse becoming weaker and more irregular. The head injury was serious, but the compromised airway was the immediate threat. He had to act quickly. Using techniques learned during military training, Marcus began carefully repositioning Brandon to clear his airway while maintaining spinal alignment. The process required precise movements and constant monitoring of vital signs. Too much movement could cause permanent paralysis. Too little could result in death from respiratory failure. "He's bleeding more now," Mrs. Thornfield observed anxiously from outside the vehicle. Marcus could see the increased bleeding, but he recognized it as superficial head wounds rather than signs of new trauma. The repositioning was actually improving Brandon's circulation, allowing previously restricted blood flow to resume. His breathing immediately became less labored as his airway cleared. "That's good," Marcus explained, though he doubted the crowd understood. His airway was blocked. He can breathe properly now. The smoke from the engine was becoming more concerning. Marcus could smell burning plastic and rubber, indicating that the vehicle's electrical system was overheating. Modern cars contain numerous flammable materials, and he knew they had minutes rather than hours before the situation became critical. "We need to get him out now," Marcus announced. "This car is going to catch fire." Dr. Chen stepped closer to the vehicle, her medical training warring with her concerns about Marcus's qualifications. "How do you know? Are you a firefighter too?" "I know what burning cars smell like," Marcus replied grimly. "And I know we're running out of time." He began the careful process of extracting Brandon from the driver's seat. Military training had taught him how to move trauma patients while minimizing spinal damage. The technique required supporting the head, neck, and torso as a single unit while gradually rotating the patient toward the exit point. Brandon was heavier than he looked, and his unconscious state made the process more difficult. Marcus had to work slowly and deliberately, constantly monitoring the young man's breathing and pulse while maneuvering him through the cramped vehicle interior. Sweat dripped from Marcus's forehead as he concentrated on the delicate extraction. "Is he moving his legs?" someone called out from the crowd. Marcus glanced down and saw slight movement in Brandon's lower extremities, a positive sign for spinal function. "Yeah, some movement." "That's good." The crowd watched in fascination and horror as Marcus continued the extraction process. His movements appeared professional and deliberate, contradicting their initial assumptions about his qualifications. Several residents began filming the rescue attempt with their phones, though whether from genuine interest or potential legal protection wasn't clear. "Should we be recording this?" Mr. Harrison whispered to his wife. "Definitely," she replied quietly. "If something goes wrong, we need evidence of what actually happened." Marcus was now supporting Brandon's full weight as he maneuvered him through the passenger door opening. The process required careful coordination to avoid bumping the patient's head or limbs against the damaged vehicle frame. Years of experience moving wounded soldiers had prepared him for this type of precision work under pressure. Brandon's breathing remained stable during the extraction, confirming that Marcus's initial airway management had been successful. His pulse was weak but steady, indicating that immediate life-threatening injuries had been addressed. The head wound continued bleeding, but Marcus could see it was less severe than initially feared. "Almost got him," Marcus announced as he supported Brandon's shoulders and prepared for the final movement out of the vehicle. The crowd had grown to include more neighbors drawn by the commotion. Word was spreading through the exclusive community that something serious had happened to the Wellington boy. Several residents were already on their phones, calling family members and sharing updates about the developing situation. With one final careful movement, Marcus successfully extracted Brandon from the wreckage and laid him on the grass beside the vehicle. He immediately began checking vital signs and assessing the extent of injuries. Brandon remained unconscious, but his breathing was stronger now that his airway was clear. "Is he going to be okay?" Mrs. Thornfield asked, her earlier hostility replaced by genuine concern. Marcus was performing a rapid trauma assessment, checking for signs of internal bleeding, broken bones, and neurological damage. His hands moved systematically across Brandon's body, feeling for abnormalities while monitoring breathing and circulation. The head wound appeared to be the most serious visible injury, though internal damage remained a concern. "He needs immediate hospital care," Marcus said. "But his vitals are stabilizing." The extraction was successful. Just then, the sound of approaching sirens filled the air. The fire department and paramedics were finally arriving, their flashing lights reflecting off the windows of surrounding mansions. Marcus felt relief wash over him as professional medical equipment and trained personnel approached the scene. But his relief was short-lived. As the emergency vehicles parked and personnel began unloading equipment, Marcus noticed the crowd's demeanor changing. Whispered conversations were starting among the residents, and several were pointing in his direction. The dynamics of the situation were shifting now that the immediate medical emergency had been addressed. "Thank God they're finally here," Dr. Chen said loudly, clearly directing her comment toward the arriving paramedics rather than acknowledging Marcus's successful intervention. The first paramedic team reached the scene and immediately took over Brandon's care. Their assessment quickly confirmed that the extraction had been performed correctly and that vital signs were stable. Marcus stepped back to give them room to work, his part in the rescue complete. "Who performed the extraction?" the lead paramedic asked while examining Brandon. "I did," Marcus replied. "I'm a former Army medic." The paramedic looked at Marcus with professional respect. "Good work. Clean extraction, maintained airway, no apparent secondary trauma. You probably saved his life." The validation from a medical professional should have ended any questions about Marcus's actions, but the crowd's whispers continued. Something was changing in the atmosphere, and Marcus began to sense that his role in the rescue was being viewed differently by the assembled residents. Where exactly did you come from? Mr. Harrison asked Marcus directly. I was walking home from work, Marcus explained. I live about 2 miles from here. I take this route most nights. Walking through our neighborhood at midnight? Mrs. Thornfield's suspicion was barely concealed. That's unusual. Marcus felt the familiar weight of judgment that came with being a black man in spaces where he wasn't expected. He'd experienced it countless times over the years, but it stung particularly now, after risking himself to save someone's life. It's a public sidewalk, Marcus said quietly. I've never caused any trouble. I'm not saying you caused trouble, Mr. Harrison clarified. I'm just wondering why you were here at this particular time. The implication hung in the air like smoke from the damaged vehicle. Marcus realized that his presence at the scene was being questioned despite his obvious role in saving Brandon's life. The crowd that had watched him perform a successful medical extraction was now viewing him with suspicion rather than gratitude. The paramedics had loaded Brandon onto a stretcher and were preparing to transport him to University Hospital. His condition had stabilized enough for transport, though he remained unconscious. The head injury would require immediate surgical evaluation, but the prognosis looked positive thanks to the quick action that had cleared his airway. Excellent work on the extraction, the paramedic told Marcus again as they loaded the ambulance. Your military training shows. He's lucky you were here. But as the ambulance drove away with Brandon, Marcus noticed that the crowd's attention had turned fully toward him. The emergency was over, the victim was safe, but questions were being raised about his presence and actions. He sensed that the story of this night was about to take an unexpected and troubling turn. I think we should wait for the police to arrive, Dr. Chen said loudly enough for everyone to hear. They'll want statements from everyone who was here. Marcus nodded agreement, though he was beginning to understand that his role might be shifting from rescuer to suspect. The very people he'd helped by saving Brandon's life were now questioning his motives and his right to be in their neighborhood. The heroism of the moment was being overshadowed by prejudice and suspicion. The police sirens were audible in the distance, growing louder as they approached Millbrook Heights. Marcus stood beside the wrecked Lamborghini, his work clothes still stained with Brandon's blood, waiting to give his statement about the rescue. He had no idea that the next few hours would transform him from a good Samaritan into a suspected criminal. Before we continue with what happened when the police arrived, hit that subscribe button and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. This story needs to be heard worldwide. Because what Marcus Johnson was about to face would expose the ugly truth about how society judges heroes by their appearance rather than their actions. The flashing red and blue lights of the police cruisers illuminated the faces of Millbrook Heights residents as two officers stepped out of their vehicles. Officer Patricia Martinez, a 15-year veteran, surveyed the accident scene with practiced eyes. Her partner, Detective James Riley, was already pulling out his notebook to begin taking statements. All right, everyone, Officer Martinez announced to the crowd. We need to understand exactly what happened here tonight. Who witnessed the accident? Several hands went up among the residents. Mrs. Thornfield stepped forward first, clearly establishing herself as the primary spokesperson for the group. We all heard the crash around 11:47. The Wellington boy was driving too fast on the curve. Brandon Wellington? Detective Riley asked, recognizing the name immediately. The Wellington family's prominence in the city made this more than a routine traffic accident. How is he? Unconscious, head injury, but stable, Dr. Chen reported. The paramedics just transported him to University Hospital. Detective Riley nodded and began writing. Who was first on scene after the accident? We were, Mrs. Thornfield gestured to the group of residents. But we couldn't get close to the car because of the damage. We called 911 and waited for professionals. That was the right call, Officer Martinez agreed. Vehicle extractions require special training. Actually, the lead paramedic interjected before climbing back into his truck. Someone did perform an extraction. Clean work, too. Saved the kid's life. Detective Riley looked around the group of well-dressed residents. Which one of you has medical training? I'm a physician, Dr. Chen said, but I didn't touch the vehicle. Too dangerous without proper equipment. The paramedic pointed toward Marcus, who had been standing quietly at the edge of the crowd. Him. Former military medic, he said. Did everything right. All eyes turned toward Marcus, and the atmosphere immediately shifted. The police officers sized him up quickly, noting his work clothes, his race, and his obvious status as an outsider in this wealthy neighborhood. Detective Riley's expression became more guarded. "Sir, could you step over here please?" Detective Riley called to Marcus. Marcus approached the officers, his movements careful and non-threatening. He'd learned long ago how to interact with police in ways that minimized conflict, though tonight he'd hoped his role as a rescuer might change those dynamics. "I'm Marcus Johnson," he said, extending his hand to the detective. "I extracted the victim from the vehicle after determining that it posed a fire risk." Detective Riley shook his hand but maintained professional distance. "What's your medical background, Mr. Johnson?" "Army medic, 2 tours in Afghanistan. I've performed vehicle extractions under combat conditions." "When did you leave the service?" 2008, I've been working construction since then." Officer Martinez looked around the neighborhood's expensive homes. "What brings you to Millbrook Heights at midnight, Mr. Johnson?" The question Marcus had been dreading. He explained his walking route home from work, the bus stop at the neighborhood's edge, his regular shortcut through the area. The explanation was truthful but sounded thin even to his own ears. Why would a construction worker be walking through the wealthiest neighborhood in the city at nearly midnight? "You walk through here often?" Detective Riley asked. "Most nights after work. It's the fastest route to my apartment." Mrs. Thornfield cleared her throat loudly. "Officer, I think you should know that we've never seen this man in our neighborhood before tonight." Marcus felt his stomach drop. The implication was clear and damaging. "I keep to myself," he said quietly. "I don't disturb anyone." "I'm sure you don't," Detective Riley said in a tone that suggested otherwise. "But you understand how this looks. Expensive car crashes, young man from a prominent family gets hurt, and the only person willing to get close to the vehicle is someone who doesn't belong in the neighborhood." "I saved his life," Marcus said, his voice remaining calm despite his growing frustration. "So you say," Officer Martinez replied. "But we only have your word about what happened before we arrived." Dr. Chen stepped forward, her medical credentials giving her words extra weight. "Officers, I want to be clear about something. When I arrived on scene, the Wellington boy was already unconscious in the vehicle. This man," she pointed at Marcus, "was not here yet." "How long between the crash and his arrival?" Detective Riley asked. "Maybe 10 minutes, Mrs. Thornfield estimated. We were all here trying to figure out how to help when he showed up." Marcus felt the narrative being constructed around him, and it wasn't favorable. The timeline made it sound like he'd arrived after the accident rather than being a random passerby who'd heard the crash. Combined with his unfamiliarity to the residents, the implication was that he'd come to the scene for reasons other than rescue. "Mr. Johnson," Detective Riley said formally, "I need to ask you some direct questions. Have you ever seen Brandon Wellington before tonight?" "No, sir." "Do you know anything about the Wellington family or their business interests?" "Just what everyone knows from the news. They're wealthy." "Have you ever been inside the Millbrook Heights neighborhood before tonight?" Marcus hesitated. The truth was that he'd walked through the area dozens of times over the past 2 years, but always late at night when few residents were around. Admitting to regular presence in the neighborhood would only reinforce their suspicions. "I've walked through occasionally," he said carefully. Officer Martinez and Detective Riley exchanged glances. Marcus's hesitation had been noted and interpreted unfavorably. In their experience, innocent people answered such questions immediately and directly. "Occasionally?" Detective Riley pressed. "How often would you estimate?" Marcus realized that any answer would sound wrong. Too frequently would suggest surveillance or planning. Too infrequently would contradict his claim about it being a regular route. "Maybe once or twice a week, depending on my work schedule." "And the residents never noticed you before?" Officer Martinez asked. Like I said, I keep to myself. I walk on the sidewalk and mind my own business. Mrs. Thornfield whispered something to Mr. Harrison, who nodded grimly. Marcus could see private conversations happening throughout the crowd, and he suspected they weren't discussing his medical skills. Officers, Mr. Harrison called out, I think there's something you should know. When this man first arrived on scene, he seemed very interested in the car itself. He walked all around it before approaching the victim. Marcus's heart sank. The observation was accurate but damaging without context. He'd been assessing the vehicle's stability and identifying the safest extraction point, standard procedure for trauma situations. But to untrained observers, it could look like he was examining the car's value or looking for opportunities. I was determining the best approach for extraction, Marcus explained. You have to assess the vehicle's condition before attempting rescue. How convenient, Dr. Chen said skeptically. And how did you know the car was in danger of catching fire? That's very specific knowledge. Marcus described the smoke, the smell of burning electrical components, the risk of fuel ignition. His explanation was technically accurate and demonstrated genuine expertise, but the crowd's suspicion had already crystallized. They were no longer looking for reasons to believe him. Detective Riley was taking detailed notes, and Marcus could see that the investigation was shifting focus. Instead of a straightforward accident report, this was becoming something more complex. The wealthy resident's concerns were being taken seriously, while his role as rescuer was being questioned. Mr. Johnson, I want you to understand something, Detective Riley said. Brandon Wellington is the son of one of this city's most prominent families. If he dies from his injuries, this becomes a very different kind of investigation. The threat was subtle but clear. Marcus was being positioned as a potential suspect rather than a good Samaritan. His medical intervention, which had undoubtedly saved Brandon's life, was being reframed as possible evidence of involvement in causing the injuries. I understand, Marcus said quietly. Do you? Officer Martinez asked. Because from where we're standing, we have a young man from a wealthy family who crashes his car in his own neighborhood, and the only person willing to touch him is someone who admits to regularly walking through the area uninvited. Marcus felt the weight of institutional suspicion settling around him. His military service, his medical training, his successful rescue of Brandon Wellington, none of it mattered compared to the simple facts of his race and class status in a neighborhood where he didn't belong. The crowd had grown larger as word spread through Millbrook Heights about the accident. More residents emerged from their homes, and Marcus could hear fragments of conversation that made his situation clear. Strange coincidence. Very suspicious timing. Why was he really here? Detective Riley closed his notebook and looked directly at Marcus. Mr. Johnson, I think it would be best if you came down to the station to give a formal statement. Just to clear up any confusion about tonight's events. Marcus knew this wasn't really a request. Am I under arrest? No, sir. But there are questions that need answering, and the station is a better environment for detailed discussion. The language was polite, but Marcus understood he was being detained for questioning. The hero of the evening was being treated like a criminal, while the people he'd helped stood by watching without protest. The injustice was staggering, but arguing would only make his situation worse. I'll need to call my family, Marcus said. Let them know I'll be late. Of course, Detective Riley agreed. You can make your call from the station. As Marcus was being guided toward the police cruiser, Mrs. Thornfield approached Officer Martinez. I want to make sure you have all our contact information, she said. We'll be happy to testify about what we witnessed tonight. Marcus caught the word testify and realized how far the situation had deteriorated. What should have been witness statements about a rescue were being treated as potential testimony in a criminal case. The narrative had been completely flipped. Actually, Dr. Chen added loudly enough for Marcus to hear, I want to go on record stating that moving a trauma patient without proper equipment is extremely dangerous. If Brandon Wellington suffers permanent injury, whoever moved him bears responsibility. The statement was medically debatable and legally problematic, but it served to further criminalize Marcus's actions. The doctor who had refused to help when Brandon was dying was now suggesting that the person who did help should be held liable for any negative outcomes. Marcus sat in the back of the police cruiser as Detective Riley drove toward downtown. Through the window, he could see the crowd of residents still gathered around the accident scene, their expensive neighborhood violated by both the crash and his unwelcome presence. The wreckage of the Lamborghini sat beneath the oak tree like evidence of some crime he was now suspected of committing. The irony was profound and painful. Marcus Johnson, who had served his country in combat and saved lives under enemy fire, was being treated as a criminal for saving the life of a young man whose only mistake had been driving too fast on a dark road. The hero had become the villain simply by being black and poor in a space where neither was welcome. As the police station came into view, Marcus realized that the night's ordeal was just beginning. Brandon Wellington was safe in the hospital, his life preserved by Marcus's quick action and medical expertise. But Marcus himself was now fighting for his reputation, his freedom, and his future. The rescue that should have made him a hero was instead about to make him a suspect in a case that could destroy everything he'd worked to build. The wealthy residents of Millbrook Heights returned to their mansions that night secure in the knowledge that justice was being served. The dangerous outsider who had threatened their community's safety was being properly investigated. They slept peacefully, unaware that they had participated in transforming an act of heroism into an accusation of criminality. Marcus Johnson, meanwhile, prepared to spend the rest of the night answering questions about his motives, his background, and his right to exist in spaces where people like him weren't supposed to be. The man who had risked his own safety to save a stranger's life was about to discover how quickly a hero could become a villain when society decided that heroes weren't supposed to look like him. The fluorescent lights hummed in interview room 3 as Detective Riley placed a recorder on the metal table. Marcus Johnson sat across from him at 2:17 a.m., still wearing his blood-stained construction clothes. "Mr. Johnson, walk me through your evening starting from when you left work." Marcus explained his routine. He'd clocked out at Wellington Construction at 11:30 p.m. after a double shift. He took the number 47 bus to Millbrook Heights Edge, then walked his usual shortcut home to save 20 minutes. "How long have you taken this route?" Detective Riley asked. "About 2 years, since I started night shifts. Most nights I don't see anyone. It's after midnight. But people notice you. You know how it is, detective. Black man walking through a wealthy white neighborhood at night. People notice." Detective Riley's expression remained neutral. "Tell me about your military service." Marcus straightened. 2 tours in Afghanistan, 2005 to 2008. Combat medic with the 82nd Airborne Division. "Any disciplinary actions?" The question stung. "No, sir. Honorable discharge. I can provide my DD-214. After discharge, what brought you here?" "My ex-wife's family. We divorced 2 years after I came home, but I stayed for my daughters. Keisha's 16, Amara's 14. The irony wasn't lost on Marcus. He was working toward EMT certification, the same skills he'd demonstrated saving Brandon's life. But instead of celebration, he sat in an interrogation room. "Let's get back to tonight. What were your first thoughts seeing Brandon Wellington trapped?" Marcus closed his eyes, recalling those crucial moments. "I saw an unconscious young man in a damaged car that was starting to smoke. My training kicked in. Assess, identify threats, determine if the patient can be safely moved. Residents said you walked around the vehicle first. What were you looking for?" "Structural damage, fuel leaks, electrical hazards, best access point. Standard protocol." "Did you recognize the expensive car?" The implication was clear. "I saw it was a Lamborghini, but that didn't matter. A patient is a patient, whether they're driving a supercar or pickup truck." Detective Riley leaned forward. "That car costs more than most people make in 5 years. Detective, I've treated millionaires and homeless people with the same hands. In Afghanistan, I didn't check bank accounts before applying pressure bandages. Rich or poor, everyone bleeds the same. The detective paused at Marcus's conviction. Dr. Chen suggested moving Brandon without equipment was dangerous. Marcus showed his first frustration. Dr. Chen is a dermatologist. She treats skin conditions, not trauma patients. I've extracted wounded soldiers from burning vehicles under enemy fire. So the doctor was wrong? She wasn't qualified to make that assessment. Brandon's airway was compromised, he showed signs of internal bleeding, and the vehicle indicated potential fire. Waiting 15 minutes for equipment would have been a death sentence. Detective Riley switched tactics. Let's talk about your finances. The question hit hard. I make $18 an hour in construction. I pay child support, rent, and save for school. I'm not wealthy. Any debts? Financial pressures? Everyone has financial pressures. But I've never stolen, never hurt anyone for money. The detective pulled out a photograph of Brandon's diamond Rolex. This watch is worth $50,000. More than you make in 2 years. I didn't touch his watch. Didn't even notice it. Officer Martinez entered with a folder. We ran your name. You were arrested 3 years ago for assault. Marcus felt his stomach drop. Charges were dropped. Self-defense. Tell me about that incident. 3 guys followed me from a convenience store, made comments about me not belonging in their neighborhood. One had a knife. The store's security camera showed everything. The DA dropped charges. But you were arrested initially. Because when police arrived, they saw 3 white guys down and 1 black guy standing. They made assumptions. The parallel hung heavy. Again, Marcus was judged by appearance rather than actions. The questioning continued for hours, dissecting every aspect of Marcus's life, looking for criminal motives where none existed. At 3:45 a.m., Detective Riley turned off the recorder. Brandon Wellington comes from one of this city's most prominent families. His father owns the building we're in. If anything happens to that young man, this becomes priority for everyone from the mayor down. I understand. Do you? A poor black man with violence history, walking through wealthy white neighborhood at midnight, only person who touches critically injured rich kid. How does that look? It looks like I saved someone's life. Marcus was released at 4:15 a.m. into pre-dawn darkness. He walked 5 miles home, his boots echoing off empty sidewalks. His small apartment felt different now, decorated with daughter's photos and military mementos, but somehow violated by the night's events. His phone buzzed. Denise, kids asking why you missed breakfast. Everything okay? He'd forgotten Saturday morning breakfast with his daughters. How could he explain their father was investigated for harming someone he'd saved? Work emergency. We'll call later. At University Hospital, Brandon Wellington regained consciousness at 6 a.m. Dr. Sarah Mitchell reviewed his chart with growing appreciation for the roadside care. Whoever extracted him knew exactly what they were doing, she told the nurse. Professional quality work. Brandon's parents, Richard and Patricia Wellington, arrived in expensive suits in panic. Richard controlled a business empire worth hundreds of millions. What's his prognosis? Richard demanded. Better than feared. Whoever extracted him prevented catastrophic additional injury. Patricia looked confused. The paramedics got him out. No, ma'am. Someone with medical training probably saved your son's life. Richard's expression hardened. We were told some stranger interfered. Someone who didn't belong. Meanwhile, news spread through social media. Posts from Millbrook Heights painted Marcus as dangerous. Strange man lurking in our neighborhood. Police investigating his involvement. The narrative solidified before truth could emerge. Marcus was being convicted in public opinion while Brandon fought for life. At 8 a.m., Detective Riley called. Brandon's awake. He's asking to speak with you. Is that good or bad news? We'll see. Can you be here in an hour? Marcus arrived to find news vans lining the street. Inside, Detective Riley waited grimly. The media's calling you the mystery man. Brandon's family thinks you might have caused the accident. Involved how? They think you were following him, waiting to rob him. The accident was unplanned complication. That's insane. I saved his life. Maybe. Or maybe you caused his injuries and saved him to avoid murder charges. The twisted logic reinterpreted every helpful action as evidence of guilt. At noon, Marcus entered Brandon's hospital room. The young man looked fragile, head bandaged, surrounded by equipment. His parents stood guard, expressions hostile. Brandon, Detective Riley said, "This is Marcus Johnson, who extracted you from your vehicle." Brandon studied Marcus's face, struggling to focus. "I remember the crash. Driving too fast on the curve. Hit the tree." "What do you remember after impact?" "Pain. Couldn't breathe. Then someone was talking to me, moving me." Patricia leaned forward anxiously. "Had you seen this man before?" Brandon looked at Marcus intently. Marcus held his breath. "No. Never seen him before." Relief flooded Marcus, but Brandon continued. "But I remember him pulling me out. He knew what he was doing. Medical stuff. He saved my life." The room fell silent. Brandon's testimony was clear. Marcus hadn't caused the accident and had performed the life-saving rescue. The truth was finally coming out, but would it be enough? Hit subscribe for more stories about ordinary heroes facing extraordinary injustice, and tell me in the comments, have you witnessed this prejudice? Patricia looked stricken. "The police think he was following you." Brandon shook his head. "Mom, he saved my life. The car was smoking, I couldn't move, I thought I'd die. Then he was there." Richard's expression changed from hostility to confusion. "What was he doing in our neighborhood?" "Walking home from work," Marcus said quietly. Brandon looked at his father. "Dad, it doesn't matter why he was there. He was there when I needed help. Everyone else was too scared." Detective Riley closed his notebook. "Mr. Johnson, you're no longer a person of interest." Brandon extended his hand. "Thank you. I owe you my life." Richard Wellington cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Mr. Johnson, we owe you an apology. And gratitude." But Patricia persisted. "I still don't understand why you were there at night." Brandon looked disappointed at his mother. "Mom, he walks home from work." "So what? It's just unusual." "What's unusual is someone was there to help. Maybe be grateful instead of questioning." Over following days, media narrative shifted. Local veteran saves life, faces suspicion. When heroes don't look like heroes, race and class in emergency response. The Wellingtons arranged a public ceremony. The mayor presented Marcus with a civilian life-saving award. Marcus Johnson represents the best of our community. His courage reminds us heroes come in all forms. Brandon was profoundly affected. "I grew up thinking everyone was treated fairly. Watching how Marcus was treated showed me how wrong I was." He established a scholarship fund for disadvantaged students pursuing medical careers, named for Marcus. Marcus returned to construction, but his life had changed. He'd formed unlikely friendship with Brandon. "You saved my life twice," Brandon told him. "Once from the accident, once from ignorance." Marcus achieved his EMT goal with Brandon providing scholarship. He now works for city emergency services, using military training professionally. The police implemented bias training using Marcus's case. Detective Riley acknowledged nearly criminalizing heroic actions. Millbrook Heights residents faced uncomfortable questions about assumptions. Some examined their biases. Others continued viewing Marcus suspiciously despite proven heroism. Dr. Chen faced scrutiny for criticizing life-saving care. She apologized and donated to Marcus's fund. The story sparked community conversations about race, class, and assumptions. It became case study in sociology classes and police training nationwide. Marcus's heroism saved Brandon's life, But the aftermath saved something else. It rescued a community from prejudices, forcing confrontation with uncomfortable truths about judging heroism and worth. The story became a reminder that heroes don't always look expected. Sometimes they wear hard hats instead of uniforms, carry lunch pails instead of briefcases, live in apartments instead of mansions. But their courage and willingness to risk themselves remains the same. Marcus proved heroism isn't about appearance, it's about character and doing what's right, even when society punishes you. Marcus had been invisible to Millbrook Heights residents for 2 years until he became their savior. His presence was unremarkable until miraculous, suspicious until heroic. The screech of tires echoed through Millbrook Heights at 11:47 p.m., followed by the sickening crunch of metal meeting ancient oak. The midnight blue Lamborghini Huracan, worth more than most people's homes, wrapped around the massive tree like aluminum foil. Steam rose from the crumpled hood. The driver's side door had caved inward, trapping the unconscious figure slumped over the steering wheel. Brandon Wellington III, heir to the Wellington Industries fortune, wasn't moving. Blood trickled from a gash on his forehead, pooling on the cream leather seats his father had specially ordered from Italy. The 23-year-old's breathing was shallow, barely perceptible. His left arm hung at an unnatural angle. Through the spider-webbed windshield, residents of the exclusive neighborhood began emerging from their mansions, drawn by the violent sound that had shattered their peaceful evening. But they kept their distance. The first to arrive was Mrs. Patricia Thornfield, clutching her silk robe as she approached the wreckage. Her husband followed, cell phone already pressed to his ear, calling 911. Behind them came the Harrisons from the corner estate, then the Blackwoods from across the street. Within minutes, a small crowd of Millbrook Heights elite had gathered, their faces illuminated by the flickering streetlights and the occasional flash of someone's phone camera. "Is someone hurt?" Mrs. Thornfield asked, though the answer was obvious. "It's the Wellington boy," Mr. Harrison whispered, recognizing the car's distinctive custom paint job. "Brandon. Oh my God, is he breathing?" The crowd murmured anxiously, but nobody moved closer to the vehicle. The car's engine ticked ominously as it cooled, and thin wisps of smoke began curling from beneath the hood. Everyone could see Brandon trapped inside, unconscious and bleeding, but they hesitated. These were successful people, doctors and lawyers and business executives, yet none had medical emergency training. The car's damage was severe enough that moving him incorrectly could cause permanent paralysis or death. "We should wait for the paramedics," Dr. Rebecca Chen said, though her medical degree was in dermatology, not emergency medicine. "Spinal injuries require proper equipment." The others nodded in agreement, maintaining their respectful distance while secretly filming the scene. In today's social media world, the tragic accident of a prominent family's son would be news within hours. Several residents had already posted to their private neighborhood Facebook group, sharing grainy photos and asking if anyone knew what had happened. "Where are the damn ambulances?" someone muttered as precious minutes ticked by. Steam continued rising from the engine compartment, and the smell of hot metal and leaked fluids filled the air. Brandon remained motionless, his designer clothes torn and stained with blood. Time was running out, but the assembled crowd seemed frozen by a combination of genuine concern and social paralysis. These were people accustomed to delegating emergencies to professionals, not handling them personally. That's when Marcus Johnson appeared. He came walking along Millbrook Avenue, his heavy work boots scuffing against the pristine sidewalk. His yellow hard hat was tucked under one arm, and his orange safety vest bore the stains of a 12-hour construction shift. At 42, Marcus carried himself with the steady gait of a man who'd spent decades performing physical labor. His dark skin glistened with perspiration despite the cool October evening, and his clothes smelled of concrete dust and honest work. Marcus was taking his usual shortcut through the wealthy neighborhood, a route that saved him 20 minutes on his walk home to the apartment he shared with his 2 teenage daughters. He'd finished his shift at the downtown construction site at 11:30, then caught the last bus to the edge of Millbrook Heights. The wealthy residents typically didn't appreciate working-class strangers walking through their streets, but Marcus kept to himself and never caused trouble. Tonight was different, though. The flashing lights and gathering crowd immediately caught his attention. What happened here? Marcus asked, approaching the outer edge of the group. Mrs. Thornfield glanced at him with obvious discomfort. Marcus's presence reminded her that their exclusive neighborhood wasn't as isolated from the outside world as they preferred to believe. Car accident, she said curtly. We're waiting for emergency services. Marcus looked past the crowd to the wreckage, and his expression immediately changed. Years of Army medic training kicked in as he assessed the situation with professional eyes. The victim was unconscious, possibly with head trauma. The vehicle's position suggested high-speed impact. Most critically, smoke was now visibly rising from multiple points under the hood, and Marcus could smell the acrid scent of burning electrical components. How long has he been unconscious? Marcus asked, stepping closer to the vehicle. Since the crash, Dr. Chen replied. About 8 minutes now. 8 minutes. Marcus knew that timeline was crucial for head injuries. More importantly, his trained nose detected the distinct smell of leaking gasoline mixing with the electrical smoke. The crowd seemed oblivious to the danger, but Marcus recognized the early signs of a potential vehicle fire. In his Army days, he'd seen what happened when damaged vehicles weren't evacuated quickly enough. We need to get him out of there, Marcus said, his voice carrying unmistakable authority. Absolutely not, Dr. Chen protested. Moving him could cause permanent paralysis. We have to wait for proper equipment. Marcus studied the scene more carefully. The driver's side door was completely crushed, but the passenger side appeared accessible. Through the shattered windows, he could see Brandon's chest rising and falling irregularly. The young man's positioning suggested possible spinal damage, but Marcus had been trained to weigh risks. Leave him in a potentially burning vehicle or risk spinal injury during evacuation. The choice was becoming clearer by the moment as more smoke appeared. Sir, I don't think you understand, Mrs. Thornfield said, noticing Marcus's intense focus on the vehicle. This is a very serious situation. We've called for professional help. But Marcus wasn't listening to the social dynamics anymore. His medical training had taken over, and he was calculating angles, injuries, and evacuation techniques. Brandon Wellington III might be the son of a billionaire, but right now he was simply a trauma patient who needed immediate help. Marcus had sworn an oath years ago to preserve life whenever possible, regardless of the circumstances. The crowd watched nervously as Marcus approached the vehicle. His work boots crunched on scattered glass as he circled to the passenger side, examining the damage pattern and the victim's position. Through the windows, he could see Brandon more clearly now. The young man's breathing was becoming more labored, and Marcus noticed the telltale signs of internal bleeding. His medical training from his Army years was rusty but intact. He'd saved lives in Afghanistan under much worse conditions than this. Sir, please step away from the vehicle, Mr. Harrison called out. The authorities will handle this. Marcus ignored him. He was now operating purely on medical instinct, the same drive that had. This shows heroes don't always look like we expect. Marcus risked everything to save a stranger and nearly became victim of prejudice we should fight. If this moved you, subscribe for more hidden hero tales. Share this video. Stories like this need telling until every Marcus gets recognition instead of suspicion. What's your take? Leave comments below. See you next time. Marcus continues as EMT, saving lives regardless of race or class. Brandon runs Social Justice Foundation. Their friendship proves understanding can emerge from tragedy, and heroes exist in unexpected places if we look past assumptions.